Welcome to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. I have Jessica Victorio, Managing Attorney, Law Offices of Jessica Victorio, on the show with me today. Jessica, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. All right. Talk to us and our audience about your practice, how it differs from traditional law firms.
Yeah, so I work mostly with startups and tech companies, and that is an industry I think that the traditional law firms don't corner well. The reason being they don't have the culture of a traditional corporation, so they don't respond well to extremely formal methods of communication.
I talk to a lot of them. No, they don't.
Yeah. I do a lot of like 2 a.m. Google Hangout board meetings.
Okay.
Yeah, we get really, but so traditional law firms aren't good at capturing that because their structure and hierarchy system and the way that they're fashioned and that they interact with clients isn't well adapted for that sort of company. And the types of companies that I deal with in terms of culture and understanding the balance between preserving culture of the startup, which is important to a lot of founders, and balancing potential legal liability. They want to focus solely on the liability, which is important, but not at the sake of culture for a lot of people. So keeping that in mind, keeping things like value and purpose in mind, those sorts of things, traditional law firms aren't well suited to handle.
Yeah, I've been through a few. They don't work so well. You really have to have a different mindset to be able to deal with that culture.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like I tell my clients all the time, I can only be as effective as our communication between each other. And if I show up in a albeit very nice suit, a very expensive suit, and I have a very formal relationship with those types of clients, they are not going to communicate with me. They won't ask me things, they won't bounce ideas off me, they won't be totally honest or forthcoming about what's going on in the company. And some of it may be subconscious, but the fact of the matter is they won't communicate that information, and that limits how effective I can be as an advisor for them.
When you get into the companies, talk to me about how you separate yourselves and the way that you function with them when it comes to setting them up for the functionality part of getting the back end straightened out for future funding, whether it's angel or friends and family, all the way out to an IPO.
Well, and I think that goes back to the first question a little. That's one thing that traditional law firms also aren't great at dealing with, is walking into a situation where really the legal landscape in a lot of these early stage startups is chaos. They've essentially been trading equity like Pokemon cards, and there's not really memorializations of any of it.
Right.
And so you have to go back and document a lot of things, make sure everyone's assigned the proper intellectual property, everyone that has exited is very clear on what they exited from and what rights they assigned. So that's normally the first thing, is figuring out who all is actually involved in what we are now calling the company in its multiple variations, which,
Gosh,
you know,
must walk into
Yeah, you know, I kind of like the chaos. The problems emerge when they can't fully remember everyone that was involved, or they'll say there was a guy named Michael who was involved at the very beginning. He didn't really do much. They always say he didn't do much. And I have found that tends not to be as accurate as you may think.
It's not the way Michael remembers it.
Yeah, Michael remembers it differently. And it's amazing the low level of valuation, because they think they don't have to worry about these things until they're doing a Series A and trying to raise $25 million.
Right.
But that's not true. Even a seed round investor, a more sophisticated investor, is going to want to see a clean table of ownership and capitalization. So making sure that you get those issues addressed ahead of time and all of that internal discord figured out, so that when you approach, especially as a young founder, that when you approach investors, you look like you know what you're doing and you have your act together. I'm all for laid back culture and supporting a purpose and running a more informal environment, but the underlying fundamentals of the business and the structure have to be the same. Those can't change, because that is just a reflection of the business organization's laws. So
You deal with Tech companies.
Mostly tech companies.
Do you ever deal with the crypto world, blockchain, that? Because they really overlap these days.
Yeah, so I do deal in, my practice is about 50% tech and apps. So when I say that, I mean anything technology based. 30% traditional small businesses, which really could be anything that is not tech based. And then 20% emerging tech. So blockchain, crypto, I'll throw esports in there. I do deal with a decent number of blockchain and cryptocurrency companies. I don't deal with ICOs or anything of that nature, but I do deal with cryptocurrency companies.
Biggest hurdle, getting these guys organized and funded?
You know, I've had a lot of conversations with people about this, and the people in the blockchain and crypto community are very passionate about it, and I love that about them. I love a passionate entrepreneur, but I have never once had a crypto company owner come to me and say, I will give you as much money as it takes to do a fully compliant and regulated ICO. If I had someone say that to me, I would be happy to help them with that. That's generally not the conversation I have. Generally, the conversation I have is we have a very, very minimal fixed budget. Right. We don't fully want to comply with, the full spectrum of regulations, and we want to be based somewhere offshore to attempt to avoid some of the ambiguity in regulations here. And that's not what I do. Maybe you'll find someone to help you with that. It's not me.
Somebody in Argentina could help you with that, yeah, right?
Yeah, someone in the Caymans maybe. But aside from that, I work with crypto in a lot of different capacities. And I also think, not as much now, but maybe a year ago, everyone was very hyped on that phrase, kind of that term ICO, but a lot of what people want to utilize blockchain and crypto for is not an ICO related purpose.
Smart contracts.
Yeah, smart contracts, some form of utility token, something along those lines.
That's a gray area.
Yeah,
Hey.
well, it's a gray area in some instances. There are very cut and dry examples of a utility token that don't really present a lot of gray area issues. But yes, when you start to say, well, it's a utility in that it's not technically an investment.
But does it change in value?
Yeah.
Click.
Yeah. So you can show instances of a straight utility token. And I think the best instance, for example, I have some clients that in some way, shape, or form use them as, the easiest way to compare it, and I'll do the PG example instead of the not PG example, but is Chuck E. Cheese tokens, right? If I go to Chuck E. Cheese, I get a bunch of tickets. The inherent value of those tickets may change over time. If I hold on to those tickets for 5 years, maybe a pencil cost 10 tickets 5 years ago, now it costs 12 tickets. So inherently the value of those tickets has changed. But the purpose of those tickets is not investment. I'm not collecting tickets to then invest them or make gains or create revenue later on. The purpose really is a utility for Chuck E. Cheese. So I think that's a more cut and dry example of utility tokens.
Tell me about the trends, the legal trends as we go forward, because that is a real moving target now.
Yes, legal trends in cryptocurrency and blockchain.
Technology, cryptocurrency, blockchain, because they're all kind of like really pushing to come together. Even apps are involved in it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest conversations that I have with clients is cybersecurity. Without getting too into the technology weeds, focusing too much on blockchain and crypto, cybersecurity is something that impacts everyone. You look at the regulations in Texas, and granted, our Texas regulations are less stringent and a little more flexible than a lot of other states, California, for example. But if you collect any sort of data, if you're collecting email addresses, names, home addresses, telephone numbers from your viewers or from your website subscribers, all of that is regulated personal information, even in the state of Texas. So what I see is having to have a conversation about balancing. I'm all for, okay, I'm going to stop before I say that. I have nothing against companies making money off the collection of data. If that's part of your revenue model, I am not a business advisor, and I'm not telling you to get rid of that business model. However, if it's not part of your core business model, there are a lot of companies that collect email addresses and names and phone numbers in the off chance they may at some point do a newsletter or contact those people. And the government doesn't care whether you're selling it or using it actively now. If you have the information and are collecting it, you're subject to privacy and data collection laws. So why subject yourselves to those regulation and compliance issues if it's not part of your core business model and you're not actively using it? Don't sit on data that you don't need, because it's really a liability. So.
Do you see that as being a big problem as we go forward for people not adhering to the new rules that are coming out regarding privacy?
I think especially, like I said, domestically in the United States, I think we're going to see a lot of changes over the next 2 to 5 years especially. I'll be interested to see if we adopt some of the same principles that the GDPR adopted. We had kind of been on the same track with Europe in terms of how we handled data collection and privacy laws until GDPR, and now there's a pretty stark contrast between the US laws and the European laws, so I'll be interested to see how we handled that as a nation and what changes that brings.
Do you think we're lagging, or we're just changing courses? We're not going to do all that, or we're not caught up?
I personally, the GDPR is progressive. I personally think the U.S. is probably behind Europe in that instance, and not the GDPR fully, every aspect of the GDPR, but for example, they require notices and certain waivers to be written in plain language as opposed to legalese. I think that's something we're wildly behind on. I personally, my drafting style, and this is a professional stylistic opinion, and it can differ between professionals, but I prefer to draft in plain language, because here's my opinion on it. What is the purpose of a contract at the end of the day? You want it to be enforced between the two parties. I don't want to have to sue you. If your underlying strategy for a contract is you want to sue someone on it, that's a poor strategy for a contract. And so, especially with the unpredictability of the justice system at this point and the cost of trials, so you want people to be able to comply with contracts, and they cannot do that, especially working with early stage companies or smaller companies. They cannot do that if they don't know what's in it. So it doesn't serve anyone, especially my clients, if I draft a 15-page document in a bunch of legalese that no one understands,
right, and
they have to call me to be in compliance with. And that goes back to that law firm model. I truly believe that was part of the fundamental revenue stream and model of traditional law firms. They will draft a 30-page document in complex legalese, knowing they will get additional billable hours at some point having to interpret it for you. And my clients really like me. I don't need to find a reason for them to come back to me. They will come back to me when they have problems.
They won't.
So.
They're just like, I never could get the drift on that one, so let's just look for something, right?
Yeah,
They will.
definitely.
They'll just move on.
Yeah, or they just won't file, or they won't follow it. And then that creates a huge liability and is not great for them, because if they're not following their own documents and their own procedures that they've invested all this money with me to set up, and then they do get into a lawsuit or something along those lines, and all those things we've set up were so complex that they were not following them and it wasn't realistic for them to follow them, then they would end up getting mad at me. I mean, I've never had a client do that, but logically that's what would happen, right? If you invested a bunch of money with me to set up processes and I set them up in such a wildly complex way that, yes, it provides you all the liability protection in the world, assuming you followed it, which you don't because it's way too complex. So it's a balancing act, I think, and that is, like I said, part of what traditional law firm models miss, is that balance.
I get it. I agree with you. Any other benefits or trends that you see happening before we close out?
No, I think...
or words of wisdom to the audience for what's going, why they need to think about the kind of in-house counsel, legal representation that they're engaging with in the fluid industry sector that you work in. Why would they do you versus somebody that's got the first top floors of the biggest high-rise downtown? And that's great for Grandpa, but it ain't working for me because this is not Grandpa's business.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
100%. And that's a question that I answer and address all the time. And the answer is simple, really. At the end of the day, you have to work with whoever you feel most comfortable with. Yeah. If what makes you feel comfortable about your legal professional is they're in a very fancy office downtown and they wear very fancy suits and they drive a $200,000 car and take you to very expensive dinners, all those things are great. And if that's what you need to feel comfortable, do it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not who I am. And at the end of the day, you pay for those things because they're all overhead for the law firm. So really when you look at experience, and I'm not just talking about myself, I'm talking about other solo practitioners, small firm practitioners, you're not going to see a huge difference in experience between a lot of those firms and the solo small firm practitioner. What you're going to see is a huge variation in price based on overhead. And unless you're doing something completely novel, you know, if you're United and American merging, yes, working with a top 5 firm that has experience in these major kind of once in a decade type mergers has value, and there is an importance to that.
Yeah.
But the majority of what people are doing is not novel. It needs to be customized and tailored based on, you know, the specifics of the situation. But does it require a $12,000 an hour attorney?
No.
9 times out of 10, it does not.
And the disruptors I've run into on the show or out in the street, they wouldn't even go in there. They're like, no, you just, they would stop. They would actually be more comfortable with you, somebody they can relate to, versus, okay, Grandpa's sent this attorney for me to work with. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, well, and it's all overhead. I mean, from a business perspective, especially early stage startups, you know, pre-Series A, even seed funded startups, you don't want to spend all of your cash on hand on legal. And that's what you will end up doing if you use a traditional law firm type model, is you'll end up eating all of your cash on hand on attorneys. And I don't think that that's a sustainable long-term growth model for them as a law firm, which is why I don't think that model works. And I don't think it's productive for the actual business because they'll end up cutting projects and not doing all the projects they really need to do because they only have so much money to spend on legal.
You had me when you said I do midnight Google Hangout board meetings.
I do, yeah. Especially the video game companies really enjoy those. I don't know why.
Okay. All right, Jessica, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to chat.
I can't wait for you to come back and give us some new tidbits of like, oh, wait till you see what happened here, okay?
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to keep you updated. I'll follow everything.
Okay. All right, thanks for watching CEO Money. Don't forget, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.